Hello, welcome to Spirit of Life. I'm David McLauchlan, and my guest again this week is Mark Bateman from Chaplaincy Australia. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, mate.
Again.
Good to be with you again.
Now, we were talking about last week about your whole faith journey and how you became a chaplain. Start off this week telling us about Chaplaincy Australia and how did it come about? How did it start?
Chaplaincy Australia originated back in 1996. There were a lot of individual people doing ministry or chaplaincy. I was one of them in motorsport, but we never had anything within our organisation or that we were attached to, and so it was rather loose, and potentially could be a difficulty there for some, not having any covering. But what really triggered the commencement for Chaplaincy Australia was up in Sydney. One of our pastors, Anne Uliano, was watching on her television the unfolding issue of Port Arthur and the massacre that took place. She rang and spoke to authorities down there and said, obviously you've got people there to help those who are victims and first affected by the massacre, but what about the families and the circles that radiate out from that? And they said, well, not a lot. In fact, maybe unless they come pursuing help, we just assume that they're okay. And obviously this sort of horrific incident would certainly have a lot more impact. And so Anne offered, well, could we bring some people down and actually start? And so that began then a chaplaincy model, which obviously led to, well, we need to have some people qualified and trained and who know what they're doing. And so it's all just developed from that and continued right through to 2004 as the national director. Along the way there, our executives started trying to find people who were doing chaplaincy work, and then they started getting different states then to come on board and become then representatives for each state. And so Anne structured this, pulled this team together, and we've begun to work towards then developing chaplaincy through each state as we've gone on from there in 1996.
How do you define, or do you define exactly what a chaplain is or what a chaplain does?
Good question, because you see, a chaplain really is a carer of the community. Let me go back to the origins of where the word chaplain comes from. Back in the French times, there was a Christian on his way home from church, quite a wealthy man, and was touched by a beggar who was trapped in the street in a horrific downpour. And he got out of his transportation. He tore his tunic that was on his shoulder, which was like a rain tunic, in half, but it's called a chaplain. And he tore this tunic, this chaplain, in half, gave half to the beggar, and then he continued on his journey with the other half. And that began to typify the character or what was an expression of the work of a chaplain, that he was willing to help out a person in time of need or crisis. And so the role of chaplain then developed, and we found it more when people were either in hospital and maybe in the Australian Defence Forces or in prison, traditional styles of chaplaincy. But what we're finding today is that chaplaincy is becoming so diverse in that however a person is wired up, like I'm wired up for motorsport, but there are people who are wired up for horse racing, and there's people who are wired up for other sports. I think there's one in north of the state they're called rugby or something like that. But all these different sports areas. But then there's industry, so we've got chaplains who are in industry. Then we've got chaplains who are at the airports, and a lot of trauma can happen at airports, or people can be going to a loved one's funeral, and so the role of chaplaincy is not limited. It can just begin to mature into whatever field a person's heart is moved towards, and that person then, what we will do, we'll take them on a pathway of learning and train them up and get them ready for their role in that specific field, get an accreditation and ordination in place, and then release them in that field of ministry. So my personal conviction is a chaplain is a title given to a person who's just a Christian doing what God's asked us to do, to love and care and to help and to provide support and etc. Our motto in chaplaincy is supporting people through life. And if a person there who has a Christian conviction, who knows the necessity to help and support, then that supporting through life then is the entry point for a person to become a chaplain.
So what sorts of training do you provide, and what qualifications does someone need to gain to be a fully qualified chaplain?
We have a strong conviction that chaplaincy is not something that you're taught. You actually catch it. I think there's a heart passion in there in the first place. And so we use qualified chaplains who then we will train, and we do a certificate in Christian chaplaincy and pastoral care, and we do them 5 by 3 day intensives. So we don't take people out of the marketplace, and certainly the need for more and more people in the community is so needed, so it's such a necessity. What we're working with now is actually getting people who have a heartbeat, a passion for their community from within churches. Then we'll train them up on this pathway. So we want people to have something of a diploma in ministry or a diploma in theology, so that they've got soundness about themselves when they go out there and do their chaplaincy work. And then we will upskill them in other areas of professional development, depending on what they're doing. If you are a chaplain to a nursing home, obviously issues of grief and trauma and loss are very real. If you're doing chaplaincy to a disaster response, a critical incident response, then you're needing to do areas of CISM training and trauma reduction and things like that. So depending on what chaplaincy work you do, then we will specialise something of a professional development field for people to be able to pathway down.
On that note, we have to go for a short break. You're watching Spirit of Life. We'll be back in a moment.